They'd said a woman could never pull off what she does, right up until she showed them just how wrong they were. Lieutenant Elena Cross stood before 300 Navy SEALs when Master Chief Grant Mercer made the worst mistake of his career, grabbing her like she was some rookie who needed an attitude check. 2 seconds later, the sharp crack of his wrist snapping echoed through the courtyard, and the whole Port Vega Naval Center went dead quiet because nobody there had ever witnessed someone move with such brutal calm. It wasn't just the speed that stunned them, it was the precision, the way she controlled the brake like she'd done it in places where mercy wasn't an option, and broken bones were considered restraint. Mercer had no clue about those classified files gathering dust in Langley, or the operators who still whispered her call sign in briefing rooms she wasn't allowed to step into. And when 300 hardened fighters instinctively backed away from a 5'7" woman with pale green eyes that never seemed to blink, he suddenly understood he'd just laid hands on someone the CIA spent 3 years pretending didn't exist. Morning fog rolled thick over the training grounds at Port Vega Naval Center, turning the obstacle course into a washed-out maze of walls and ropes like something from a fading nightmare. Lieutenant Cross, once a Navy 03 surface warfare officer, and now an instructor buried deep in special programs, stood at parade rest outside Building 164, watching 287 SEALs and 16 instructors file into the amphitheater for a quarterly close-quarters combat symposium. 28 years old, lean and efficient in every movement, she carried herself in a way that warned people not to underestimate her. Her khaki uniform looked razor-sharp, dark hair pulled back in strict regulation style. But it was her eyes that nobody ever forgot. Those cool green irises always calculating distance and timing, like her brain ran equations nonstop. Captain Ethan Ward, a former SEAL Team 6 operator with 26 years of scars written across his weathered face, stood beside her. He was the one who pulled strings to get her assigned here, despite half the senior enlisted force howling that she didn't belong. He glanced at her hand, drifting absent-mindedly toward her ribs, fingers brushing something beneath the uniform only she understood. The base smelled like ocean wind, gun oil, and the kind of sweat that came from pushing past what the human body should handle. Cross had spent 6 weeks here, teaching advanced combatives to SEAL candidates convinced they already knew everything about violence. Most of them stared at her like you would at a confused tourist, trying to be polite while still assuming she didn't belong. She understood why. Her official record only showed 4 years as a surface warfare officer on a destroyer, then a quiet shift into some security liaison role. Neat, boring, unremarkable. What those files didn't mention was the call sign, Reaper, or the safe house in Valmyra where she spent 22 months doing things that would stay buried until everyone involved was long gone. But before you hear how this day ends, there's something you need to know. People like Elena don't come from some mysterious hidden world. They show up from everywhere. Small towns, cities, just like the one you're sitting in now. And if you want more stories about the ones who never make headlines, this is Major Tom's Tales, where we tell them anyway. Captain Ethan Ward tapped her shoulder once, a silent reminder to pay attention. Inside the amphitheater, Master Chief Grant Mercer already had the microphone, slicing through the air with a voice sharp enough to cut. Elena learned what violence really meant when she was just 8 years old, inside a converted warehouse in Boulder, Colorado, where her father, Daniel Cross, a former Force Recon Marine, ran a no-nonsense grappling academy that smelled like sweat, rubber mats, and medicated cream. He taught her the same lesson he drilled into Marines for decades. Real violence wasn't about rage. It was leverage, timing, and committing before the other person even realized the fight had started. By 16, she was putting grown men twice her size into arm bars before their brains caught up. The Navy wasn't her original plan. She wanted the Marine Corps like her dad, but recruiters showed her the numbers. In 2014, women in combat arms were still more theory than reality, while the Navy had real billets waiting. So she commissioned, spent 4 years aboard the USS Chancellorsville learning how to steer a 9,000-ton warship through the South China Sea at night, and found she was damn good at it. Good enough that a naval intelligence officer noticed her file and asked if she'd be open to something different. The unit, known quietly as the Activity, didn't advertise its existence. They selected people who were skilled, unstoppable, and mentally wired to operate alone with 0 cavalry coming. Elena checked every box. After 8 months of training, brutal enough to make other elite programs look like warm-ups, they deployed her to Valmyra under a liaison cover. Her real mission was hunting ghosts who didn't want to be found. One ghost stuck with her. Sergeant First Class Aaron Pike, a Delta operator assigned to her team during their 9th target package. They were tracking a high-level facilitator in District 6 when the walls closed in. 3 gunmen in a room the size of a bathroom, Makarovs raised. Pike took 2 rounds to the chest before Elena dropped all 3 hostiles with a suppressed Glock, because loud gunfire would have brought dozens more. She did everything right. Sealed the wounds, held his airway, screamed for exfil, pressed her hands against his lifeblood. He still died, staring at her like he was trying to say something she'll never decipher. Extraction landed 9 minutes later, inside the golden hour on paper, but not soon enough to keep him alive. 4 months afterward, the Activity erased her footprint, rewrote her record to look like ordinary intel work, and parked her at a desk job with glowing but intentionally vague reviews. They told her the missions mattered. They told her she'd saved American lives by taking down 17 high-value targets before those men could spill any more blood. And she believed that. But she also knew Aaron Pike was dead because she'd missed a pressure plate trigger she absolutely should have caught. No confirmed kills would ever balance that debt. Now she trained men who'd never been close enough to watch the light fade from someone's eyes. Every time she demonstrated a technique, Elena thought of Pike, and the promise she made while standing over his grave at Arlington. She would make sure the next generation had the skills to survive the mistakes that had killed him. Master Chief Grant Mercer, 43, a lifelong SEAL with 4 deployments and a reputation that made rookies question whether they were tough enough, towered at 6'3" with linebacker shoulders. He ruled the close-quarters combat program with unquestioned authority. He'd fought her assignment from the moment her orders hit his desk, not loudly, but in that quiet way of a man who believed only SEALs could teach SEALs. And having a surface warfare officer in his domain was an insult to everything he valued. The symposium? His idea. A full day of demonstrations capped by an open mat session where techniques would be tested hard. Officially educational. In reality, everyone knew it was Mercer's chance to prove Elena didn't belong here. She stood among the instructors as his voice rolled across the amphitheater like a dare. He talked about real-world stress, about how lives were lost when people relied on theory instead of experience. And then he looked straight at her, pausing just long enough to make his point without saying her name. "This program is only as strong as its weakest instructor," he announced. "These warriors deserve mentors who've proven themselves in combat, not individuals promoted by admin work or diversity metrics." The silence that followed made one thing obvious. The entire crowd understood who he was targeting. Elena stayed composed, hands loose at her sides, giving him the same measured stare she'd given hostile targets in Valmyra. She'd dealt with men like him before, dangerous enough to cause real harm, insecure enough to think she was a threat, and just smart enough to wrap his bias in professionalism. Senior Chief Paul Granger took his cue during the first break, broad and stubborn, fiercely loyal to Mercer, he began grilling her with technical questions in front of trainees, questions engineered to paint her as someone who lived in manuals, not in firefights. What's your preferred retention method against multiple attackers? How many live engagements have you used these techniques in? Close quarters kills. What's your personal count? She answered cleanly, clinically, sticking to doctrine, not bragging. But answers weren't what he wanted. He was crafting a story. Elena was theory, not blood. By the afternoon, whispers had spread everywhere. The younger SEALs looked torn, caught between respect for rank and the pressure coming from above. Some watched her openly, curious whether she'd snap and make Mercer's case for him. Her first real test came during a demo. Mercer called her to the mat for a basic weapons retention drill, simple enough. Then he paired her with Chief Ryan Cole, 240 pounds of muscle with a grin that said he knew exactly why he'd been chosen. The drill was supposed to be straightforward. Cole would try to strip away her training pistol, and Elena would retain control and neutralize the threat. But instead of a controlled demonstration, Ryan Cole lunged at her with real aggression, clamping onto her wrist hard enough to bruise and throwing his entire weight forward like he was trying to run her through the floor. She adjusted instantly, redirecting his momentum, letting his size work against him. In less than 3 seconds, Cole was face down on the mat, arm extended past its limit, her knee driving into his spine. The room froze, stunned into silence. Cole slapped the mat in a frantic tap-out, cheeks flushed with embarrassment and anger. Master Chief Mercer didn't move, but the tension in his jaw made it clear this was far from finished. That night, Elena sat alone in her BOQ room, a small box that smelled of disinfectant and the ghosts of officers who'd passed through over the years. She pulled open her desk drawer and stared at the photo she always kept hidden there. Aaron Pike, outside the safe house in Valmora, both of them in plain clothes and low-profile carriers, his arm draped around her shoulders. Their smiles were wide and foolish. 7th mission completed, and they were beginning to think they were unstoppable. She remembered the weight of his arm, the sound of his laugh, and the way he used to call her Reaper like it was praise, not a reminder of how many lives she had taken. Her hands weren't shaking out of fear. She wasn't afraid of Mercer or Cole or any of them. The tremor came from holding back everything inside her that wanted to put Mercer on the ground and make him understand exactly who he was provoking. But doing that would hand him the victory he craved. It would give him every excuse to push her out and stain the memory of what Pike died for. Her fingers slid beneath her shirt, tracing the jagged scar that curved from rib to hip. Shrapnel from an IED blast 40 meters away during her 13th operation, close enough to throw her 6 feet through the air and pepper her side with metal, far enough that she survived while 2 Special Forces soldiers didn't. The surgeon at Bagram told her 3 inches deeper, and she'd have bled out before the Blackhawk arrived. The memory slammed into her. The tiny room, Pike gasping on the ground, blood bubbling despite the chest seal she'd applied, his eyes wide, then growing distant as she pumped his chest and screamed into a radio for an extraction that wasn't coming fast enough. She'd replayed that moment 10,000 times since, searching for the exact instant she failed. The pressure plate had been painted to blend with the concrete. She should have caught it anyway, so she breathed the way her father taught her, 4 in, hold, 4 out. Mercer wanted her to break, wanted justification. She wouldn't give him that, and she'd never quit, because quitting would make Aaron's death meaningless. She would burn the entire program down before letting that happen. Tomorrow would bring another test. She knew that as surely as she knew her own name. Men like Grant Mercer didn't stop until they won or were broken. she'd be ready. And when the moment came, she'd show them exactly what 22 months in Valmyra had taught her about violence, control, and the line between surviving and winning. For Pike, she reminded herself, brushing a thumb over the photograph once more before tucking it back into the drawer. For every operator who'd paid in blood for lessons, others would someday use to live. She lay back on the stiff mattress, stared at the ceiling, and waited for sleep to finally claim her. Morning arrived under a blanket of gray clouds and a sharp wind rolling in from the Pacific, tasting like salt and cold steel. Mercer unveiled a new, final evolution, a realistic capability assessment meant to separate theory from actual combat competency. The scenario: a solo hostage rescue inside the kill house. Live role players as hostiles. 8-minute clock. Limited intel. Every instructor would run it to demonstrate how they made decisions under fire. Everyone saw the setup for what it was. The kill house was built for teams. Stacking doors, cross-cover, synchronized movement. Running it alone meant impossible choices and accepting failure somewhere. When SEAL instructors missed the mark, that was understandable. But if Elena fell short, that would be the proof Mercer wanted. She was last in the lineup. She watched seasoned operators go before her, good men making smart calls and still finishing short because the layout was engineered to beat them. Mercer praised them all, talking about knowing limitations and understanding when backup is necessary. Then he called her name, and his smile looked like a predator's. The kill house, plywood and steel, 2 floors, tight hallways, a maze of rooms, 6 hostile role players scattered inside, loadout, training M4 with UTM rounds, rubber knife, no support. Mission: find and secure 2 HVTs, neutralize every hostile, extract in under 8 minutes. The buzzer hit. She moved. First floor, cleared in 85 seconds. She flowed room to room, rifle steady, breathing controlled. 3 hostiles tagged center mass with clean marking shots. The 4th rushed her blind from a corner, grabbing at the barrel, a rookie habit from too many reps and not enough real fights. She peeled his grip off, slammed an elbow into his solar plexus, and dropped him before his brain registered the pain. The first HVT sat upstairs, zip-cuffed to a chair in a room that stank of old smoke. She cleared the entry, secured him, and had just started cutting restraints when a new complication detonated through the building. Gunfire below. Multiple voices. Someone yelling that the second hostage was being moved to a vehicle outside. 4 minutes left. Her options were both wrong. Extract the first hostage and lose the second forever, or gamble everything and pursue before he disappeared. Mercer watched through the observation glass, arms folded, waiting to see failure take shape. Elena didn't hesitate. She told the first HVT to stay put, burned the location into her mind, and exited through the window. Because stairwells are fatal funnels and time was a luxury she didn't have. The 11-foot drop punched through her boots and into her knees, but she rolled, rose, and sprinted. 2 role players dragging the HVT toward a mock vehicle. One engaged with a rifle, dropped with a blue round to the shoulder before he even aimed. The second, she closed the distance so fast he froze. Redirect the barrel, keep it off the hostage. Elbow to throat, strip the weapon, own the gun. Down he went, staring at his own muzzle. 2 seconds, clean. She secured the second HVT and started toward the building to finish the extraction when Mercer's voice cut across the range. "Stop the drill!" He stormed out with Granger and 3 instructors in tow, face flushed, voice booming accusations. She'd violated safety protocols by using the window. She'd abandoned a secured hostage. Excessive force. reckless methods. Every detail technically correct, but fundamentally dishonest. Because anyone who'd seen real combat knew she'd made the exact choices required to win. Elena stood at parade rest, rifle slung, listening while 200 operators went silent enough to hear the wind. She didn't argue, didn't justify. When Mercer demanded a response, she simply stated she had completed the mission within the required time. 2 hostages secured, all hostiles neutralized, and if he wanted to document her methods, that was his authority as senior instructor. That's when Mercer made the mistake that would change everything. He stepped into her personal space, the same intimidation act he'd used on countless young operators. Looming over her like sighs could rewrite truth. His hand started to rise toward her shoulder. Whether to grab or just to assert dominance didn't matter. The instant his fingers brushed her uniform, 22 months of tightly contained violence surged up like a shadow breaking the surface. Elena reacted before conscious thought even appeared. Her left hand clamped onto Mercer's wrist, pinning it against her shoulder, controlling the joint. Her body rotated under his arm, her right hand locking around his elbow. The joint break happened faster than his brain could register the mistake, pressure spiking as she forced him onto his toes. Then she twisted his wrist in a direction nature never intended, and the crack of bone echoed like a branch snapping in winter air. Mercer collapsed, screaming. The courtyard exploded into chaos. Instructors charged forward, some toward him, some toward her, voices crashing over one another like scrambled radio signals. Senior Chief Paul Granger grabbed her arm and hit the ground a heartbeat later. His shoulder locked at an angle that sent him slapping the dirt in a panicked tap-out. Elena released him immediately, stepped back, and took a stance that made one thing unmistakably clear. If anyone else tried something stupid, she would end it just as fast. No one moved. Captain Ethan Ward cut through the crowd like a thrown blade, ordering everyone to stand down. He called for a corpsman and placed himself between Elena and a cluster of instructors who clearly couldn't decide whether to rush her or retreat. The medic reached Mercer, now ghost-pale, sweating, clutching his ruined arm, while he choked out accusations that she'd assaulted him without warning, that she was unhinged, that she needed to be arrested immediately. Ward let him rant until he ran out of oxygen, then turned to the 287 SEALs who'd seen everything and asked a single question. Who touched who first? Silence fell, loud, heavy, damning. Finally, a young instructor, Lieutenant J.G. Tyler Briggs, raised his voice from 5 feet away. He confirmed what they'd all seen. Master Chief Mercer initiated physical contact. Others joined in agreement, one after another. The role players who'd acted as hostiles stepped up next, talking over each other about how they'd watched her clear that kill house with a level of precision they'd never witnessed before. How she moved like someone who'd done the job under real fire. How every single move she used was textbook, just not from their textbook. Ward made his call. He turned to Elena and quietly told her to show them the scar. She hesitated, not out of weakness, but because that scar was a doorway into a world nobody here was meant to know existed. But Ward had the clearance, and his look said the truth didn't get to stay buried anymore. Elena undid the top button of her khaki blouse, pulled the fabric aside, revealing the curved, raised line of tissue that traveled from rib to hip. Ward addressed the silent formation. IED strike, Valmyra. 26 months ago. He continued. Lieutenant Cross was ISA, running direct action packages against high-value targets. Her call sign was Reaper. She spent 22 months doing work most of you will never be cleared to read a single sentence about. And in that moment, every whisper, every doubt, every insult against her presence here died in the dust beneath their boots, She's taken down more enemy combatants in close quarters than half the operators in this courtyard combined." Ward's words hit like a detonation. Elena watched the reaction spread, shock first, then disbelief, followed by realization as pieces clicked together. Senior SEALs exchanged looks, recalling rumors about an activity element in Valmyra that worked with razor-sharp precision. The dates fit, the kill count fit, the way she moved absolutely fit. Mercer remained on the ground, face drained to ash, as he finally understood he'd just assaulted a highly decorated operator in front of 300 witnesses. Granger stood frozen, staring at Elena as though she were a ghost that had stepped out of a classified briefing. Ward made a single phone call. 40 seconds. When he ended it, his voice carried. Ness Group 1 Command had been notified. A full investigation would begin immediately. Master Chief Mercer was relieved of all instructor duties on the spot. Lieutenant Cross would assume temporary oversight of the combatives program. The corpsman finished securing Mercer's arm and helped him to his feet. He shot Elena one look, a twisted mix of rage and fear, before allowing himself to be escorted toward the medical wing. Granger and the other senior instructors followed without risking eye contact. Small clusters of operators drifted off, whispering, working to process what they had just seen. But some didn't leave. Several students lingered, forming a loose semicircle around Elena, not blocking her but gathering like people standing closer to a fire. Their expressions held something real, respect earned, not handed out. One stepped forward. Petty Officer First Class Diego Ramos, hardly 26, and asked if she would teach them what she actually knew. Not the standard pipeline material, but the things she'd done when dying was a real possibility. Elena looked at him, then at the others waiting behind him, and for the first time in 2 years, she felt something that resembled purpose return to her chest. The investigation dragged on for 7 weeks and ended exactly how everyone predicted. Mercer had initiated unwanted physical contact with a superior officer, directly causing his own injury. He accepted non-judicial punishment, dropped to senior chief, and was reassigned to an administrative role at Naval Base Kitsap, never to train students again. Senior Chief Granger was formally counseled and sent to another command. Others involved received written reprimands. Lieutenant Cross was exonerated completely and offered a permanent position as Senior Combatives Instructor for Naval Special Warfare, with full authority to rebuild the curriculum from the ground up. She accepted. The transformation she led didn't just become policy, it became legend. She integrated ISA techniques, used hard lessons from missions that still lived in her nightmares, and designed training scenarios brutally realistic but still safe. She pushed operators beyond comfort, forced them to face the tiny details that decide whether you come home or get shipped home. But the biggest shift wasn't in the drills, it was in the mindset. The story of what happened in that courtyard didn't stay contained for long. It spread across the special operations world, growing a little sharper with every retelling, until it hovered on the edge of legend. The female operator who snapped a Master Chief's arm in front of 300 SEALs and proved her reputation wasn't rumor but earned the hard way. Younger SEALs began showing up to her training sessions with real respect instead of quiet doubt. Senior operators started pulling her aside to talk tactics. The resistance didn't vanish, change never does. But the ground had shifted, and everyone could feel it. 4 months after the incident, a letter arrived from now Senior Chief Mercer. The handwriting was too neat, like he'd rewritten it more than once. He didn't apologize, men like him rarely do, but he admitted he'd let assumptions blind him. He hoped she would keep teaching the next generation the right way, because they deserved the strongest training possible. and from what he'd seen, she was delivering exactly that. Elena read the letter twice, then filed it away. Some acknowledgments don't require a response. 7 months later, on a Friday evening, she found herself in that same courtyard as the sun melted into the Pacific, painting the sky orange and gold, while a new class ran drills in the cooling light. Diego Ramos approached from the side. Confident now, shaped by training that would have crushed most, he'd become one of her best students. Hungry to improve, unafraid to admit what he didn't know, driven the same way Aaron Pike once was. She saw the same spark in him, the kind that saves lives on missions no one will ever hear about. That weekend, she visited Arlington. She knelt before Pike's headstone, fingertips brushing the carved letters of his name. She told him about the changes, how students now learned lessons he paid for with his life, how the culture itself was shifting, how fewer men would die because of the work being done here. She told him she kept her promise. His loss wasn't wasted. Morning sunlight warmed her shoulders. She stayed until it climbed high, then stood, brushed the grass from her khakis, and walked back toward her rental. There would always be more work waiting. That was the nature of the life she chose. But for the first time since Pike had looked up at her with fading eyes, she felt like she was building something that mattered. A foundation of real skill and earned respect that would protect operators in places she would never see, on missions she would never be allowed to know. And for her, that was enough.